Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Feel free to continue eating, but I'll get my presentation started here in a moment once I got your attention. So thank you all for being here. It's beautiful faces I see. It's so amazing to see my colleagues finally. It's been a couple years, right? That we've been in a space this big with hiring committees. My name is Luke Lara, for those of you who don't know, but I think I know everybody in this room, or most people. Counseling faculty member, but also done a lot of research, did my dissertation on hiring practices in community colleges specifically. And I've been working with human resources along with several other faculty through the Academic Senate since about 2016 when we started to get more faculty involved in this process, especially around hiring other faculty, right? And so if you've been in any of these trainings over the last 6 years or so, you probably noticed we've been more engaging instead of just showing you a whole bunch of slides, which used to be the case. For those of you who have been around for a while, that used to be the situation. Come in for Flex Week, do a 2-hour sit-in, and you get PowerPointed to death. So, although we use, as you can see in the earlier presentation in mine, we have a PowerPoint presentation, but we want this to be engaging. And this section of the presentation that I'll be doing will be looking specifically at the evaluative criteria. And I want this to be engaging because you have team time after this and you had it a little bit before. This is part of that like hands-on training that we've been trying to get more infused in these types of trainings last several years. So please feel free to ask questions at any point. And I'm excited to share with you some of the work that has evolved over the years and where we're at right now with faculty hiring, especially around evaluative criteria. And first of all, I just want to give a shout out to Lisa. Great presentation earlier. You didn't know that this is a unique moment in history. You have two presenters that are Afro-Latino in the same space in the same day, all right? So, with that said, what are we talking about? Evaluative criteria. You had a piece of paper on your tables. Maybe you had an opportunity to look at it. If you've participated in hiring before, committees would have to, each committee, hiring committee for faculty hiring committee, had to develop their own evaluative criteria, right? So you had to spend time during a meeting, maybe one of your first or second meetings, to talk about, okay, so what are we going to evaluate when we're reviewing applications? How many of you remember that? Okay, I know your hands are busy eating, so, okay. I know many of you have been here longer than me, so I know you've been on hiring committees and you've had this experience. Okay. Like when you had to come together as a committee and you had to develop the criteria you were using to evaluate candidates, like their applications. Like you'd say, okay, what's going to be important? And then as a committee, you had to figure out. Then you provide that criteria, and you had to do this before you got any applicants, right? Because you had to figure out what the criteria was before that you got to see the applicants, so you could eliminate some bias in developing that criteria. Well, we have a new process now, okay? There are a preset evaluative criteria, and you see that is in front of you on that piece of paper, all right? There's 5 criteria, and we'll go over them a little bit more specifically in our activity. But you'll notice that there's 5, and the first one being education and training, right? The second one, applicable knowledge, skills, and abilities. The third being quality of diversity statement, or EEO statement. Fourth being the quality of application materials. And 5, the overall applicant rating. All right, so This is already preset, so you don't have to spend a lot of energy in terms of figuring out what are we going to be evaluating. You're going to be evaluating every candidate based on these 5 criteria. Now, we'll talk a little bit later about you'll have to spend as a committee figuring out within these categories what you're looking for. That's going to be important because we heard that in the earlier presentation, that you have to have a discussion about what you're looking for so that when you're actually deliberating, you're speaking the same language in your group, right? So this is going to be consistent, as I mentioned. It's going to be entered online. You're going to, when you're reviewing the applications online, you're going to be able to enter it, and I'll show you how you do that. And you may be familiar with this if you've participated on a classified hiring committee or an administrative hiring committee, because they've been using this process now for the last couple of years. Whereas faculty, we've been doing everything old school by paper for a while, until this year. We finally, it's 2024, right? And also, it's been a while, we haven't used it on faculty hiring committees until right now because we wanted to test it out. There's a lot of variability, or there has been before in faculty hiring searches. And so we want to see, will this like preset evaluative criteria work? And so we've tried it out. And there were about 5 hiring committees that we've used this process on in the past. And we've received feedback. By we, I mean HR. HR has received feedback on how to implement this, and so now we're confident and ready to implement this in this search period going forward, okay? So, you'll see that this has a bit of a rubric, right? As educators, faculty, you're looking at this, you probably recognize, right? If we look at like the first criterion, applicable education and training, we see that there's 3 things that you could select, right? There's meets minimum requirements, exceeds minimum requirements, or far exceeds minimum requirements, all right? So there's, and then you could read the rest of the sentence there. It tells you exactly what they're talking about, right? So it's a rubric. It's consistent, right? But perhaps on your committee, you might want to have a little bit more in-depth conversation now to further understand what these mean, so that when you walk away from today's gathering or at the next meeting that you have as a committee, you all have an idea, that you're on the same page. Again, the diversity of thought, we're not saying that there isn't something that can't be considered. You just want to be on the same page. Are we talking about apples? Are we talking about oranges? You know, that idea that a rubric is important to have some consistency and fairness in the application of criteria. I don't know about you all, but for most of us as faculty, we had to get a master's degree. But how many of you had to take a class on student assessment and read a book like this? All right. Maybe I didn't. I didn't read a book like that until I was in my graduate program and I guess my doctoral program, right? And so if you ever want to borrow my book, you can. I've highlighted it. I've put notes everywhere. This is where I learned about rubrics and the importance of rubrics in applying consistency. But when you have rubrics, they're not, how you say, they're not infallible. They're just a tool, right? And so as a group, to eliminate and reduce that bias, you need to talk about the criteria more in depth as a group. And I keep saying this, and it seems maybe abstract as I say it, but we're going to do an actual activity that will help you engage in this process, okay? It will help you to also, when you're evaluating your applicants, and you're doing this on your own, to maybe evaluate a couple and then go back, right? Back to the beginning to make sure that you were being consistent, because as you read them, you start saying, oh, okay, was I applying that same understanding in the first time I was looking at the first couple? So just making sure that the first couple people, you go back and rewrite them just so that you don't get that rater drift. Okay, it's a technical term, all right? Look at the book. All right. Now, and you also notice that the various criterion are weighted differently, okay? And have a look at that for a second and tell me or share with me or us why you think they're rated differently. Weighted, sorry, not rated, weighted.
Well, with minimum qualifications, they're not going to be in there if they were like below average.
Right. That's a good point, right? You wouldn't even be looking at them if they hadn't met the minimum qualifications, okay? So that one is not weighted as much as, say, the not applicable knowledge, skills, and abilities, right? Who else has a thought on this? Why would they be differently weighted? Go ahead. Priorities of our institution. All right. Can you expand on that a little bit more, Marcus?
So, making sure we have faculty who are, just as knowledgeable in the topics as there are.
Thank you for bringing that up. So earlier, Lisa Harris spoke to education code that says and states that administrators and faculty, in fact, in Title V now it's been changed that all employees of the community college must have an understanding and sensitivity to our diverse student population, right? And so that is a job requirement. It's just as important as having the content knowledge and expertise, right? So great point. Thank you for that, Marcus. All right, good. Y'all are a smart bunch, right? We hired the best here. Go ahead.
Hey, can I ask under the third one, quality and diversity statement, the no or minimal, partial evidence, the complete evidence, I have a little problem with the partial and complete being a number of examples. If somebody writes a diversity statement and they talk in great depth for 3 paragraphs about a year that they spent in the Peace Corps doing something, that's going to count as one example, but somebody that reciprocated 3 times per half an hour, that counts as 3. So the rubric, first person would get a 2, and the last person would get a 3.
And this is why it's important as a committee you have a discussion, right, as to what examples would be a good example that somebody might bring in. So thank you for bringing that up, Steve. And so in your committee and everybody else's committees, these are the things that will come up, right, and that you'll talk about. And then as a group, you'll say, okay, yeah, this is what would meet the complete or partial or whatever. That's important because it might be dependent on your particular discipline as well, or the students that you're working with in your discipline, right? Some disciplines might have a different student demographic that is more prevalent, that they're working with, that you're looking for people with the skills and abilities to work with the understanding of those students within your discipline, right? Julie, and then Bruce.
Are they prompted to get a certain number?
Are they prompted? No. This is if you've seen the application, there's just a text box, and they can write whatever they want.
Change because it's a reference to number as a way to be evaluated.
Oh, yes, there's a statement, and we'll look at that in the activity, yeah.
Maybe I missed this in the intro. I'm drinking my coffee. Is this mandatory? Like, this is how we do things here in the course. We're going to talk about it in the committee and all this stuff, but this is at least the bare minimum. You know what we're talking about?
This evaluative criteria, all of them, or that specific one? All of them. Yes, this is. Yes, this is a must, right? This is the criteria we're using to evaluate every candidate to determine whether we're going to be inviting them to an interview or not. Yeah.
And so, because I have at a different college. Where I was literally attacked by a colleague for having a rubric about the education, meaning that they were vehemently opposed to considering PhDs and stuff as a higher, like as something to be evaluated or added to this. It was master's degree, that's the min qual, that's all we need to consider. That's what I literally was attacked on that point. And I'm like, but I'm actually revisiting that space right now. I'm trying to get the hell out of it, but for real, it was crazy. But I'm just saying, what do we do with that? Is that like I said, because it seems pretty clear here that we're literally going to use like different levels of education as part of the criteria. But what if someone goes in that hard to say no?
To say no to what?
To say no, that we should not have that first thing, this first criteria that we see in regards to differentiating educational levels, that should not be part of our evaluation process.
Well, I think you, in listening to our previous speaker, it's important that we are. Yeah, no. That if it's not in the job description, right? If it's not a requirement, right? If it's a desirable.
No, it was a faculty hiring position.
Right. No, but like for instance, the idea of a PhD. If that's not what's required for the position, then it's something that probably shouldn't be evaluated unless, again, if it's written into the job description, then it should be. And I'll let Charlie add more if he wants to on that, but that's what I got from the earlier presentation.
Sure. So I think that when you look at that first criteria where it says education and training, it's not necessary. It could be additional training that exceeds the minimum requirements that, right? It's not necessarily locked into the degree per se. So when you're looking at meets, exceeds, or far exceeds, it doesn't necessarily translate into master's meets, PhD exceeds. It could be some other training that's relevant to the job around that discussion, and then you talk about that, right? So we have said, for example, the addition a PhD for a minimum qualification of a master's degree may hurt our diversity efforts because populations, depending on the discipline, may or not be. There may be more less marginalized populations in the pool, and screening for these extra higher things may not be in our best interest. But if there's other training that is relevant to the job that would help either exceed or far exceed that without the actual PhD label, that I think is certainly worth considering and discussing. Because the training could be around technology, the training could be around counseling or whatever it is in addition to what is happening in the classroom that's relevant to that job, right? So I wouldn't get hung up on the PhD part of it, but when you do the evaluation, I would probably lean more toward training as exceeding or far exceeding because of what we said earlier about the master's degree as a minimum qualification.
Let's talk about, just briefly, I mentioned that there was a previous process, so this is a chart to give you a comparison what we previously did. We did a paper version of evaluation criteria previously. Now it's going to be online in our system, in our PeopleSoft system. The prior year's processes, the evaluative criteria was tailored to the particular position, right? That would be a pro, right? But the cons was that it was not consistent across the hiring committees, and there was a lot of potential for bias, right? Because committees could determine something that was, not to say that this is what you did, Bruce, but to use this example of like a committee might say, okay, this was not in the job description, but let's use this particular institution and degree from this institution as the evaluative criteria. That would be pretty biased, right, given what we've learned today. So The new process, though, again, tries to remove those biases, those points of biases by trying to use rubrics, trying to create some consistency, trying to encourage the communication among the faculty members or the members of the committee to discuss what you're actually looking for, to understand, have a better understanding before you actually look for it in the applications. So that consistency and reduction of bias is a pro for this process. And if we want to have a con, we're unable to tailor it maybe specifically to the job description and adding additional criteria for evaluation. Okay. So we've already looked at the evaluative criteria. You have it in front of you. It's 5 areas. We've talked about the rating system, and you had great questions about some of these things. And so why don't we now take the opportunity to engage in a little exercise where you get to, as a committee, have a conversation about we're going to use the EEO diversity statement as our activity. So the third one. Let me just see here. So what I want you to do is, if we can get some help, Nashana's going to help pass out this handout, where at the top of the page you'll see the expanded, Erica, the expanded criteria, as well as the actual prompt to answer the question earlier about what are they asked to write. If you haven't applied to MiraCosta in the last 5 years, you probably have not seen this. Unless you've read the prompt before evaluating other candidates in previous hire searches, okay? All right. So take a moment. There are 2 sample responses at the bottom. These are sample responses. No names are attached to them. They're just application number 1 and 2. Eventually, don't read those yet. The bottom part of this page, don't read that yet. I want you to focus on the top part. I want you to read through the EEO statement prompt and the rubric. And I want to give you about 5 minutes at your tables to kind of just generate some discussion about the prompt and the rubric, come up with questions. Not to critique it, because it's not going to change between now and your application's already out there. People are responding to these, but just to kind of like think about it. What does this mean? Let's walk away today with a good understanding. Like Charlie keeps saying, is like, we want you to be able to walk away thinking, I understand this, I got this. So let's take a moment to read this, have a discussion at your table, ask questions. And then I'm going to open it up in a couple minutes, and then we'll do the next part of this activity. All right. Are we ready? We got this? All right, so I went around and I saw a lot of great student attributes in all of you. You were circling words, underlining things. And it took you a while to have a conversation, but I heard the engines revving. Some of you even went ahead and started reading the statements, but we went a little too fast, okay? Let's pull it back a little bit, and let's kind of like deconstruct first of all, what is this EEO diversity statement prompt even asking? Why are we asking this question? And do we have any questions about this question or this prompt that we're providing our candidates? Who wants to share their thoughts? Okay, Erica, and then Bruce.
I appreciate that it's specific and broad at the same time. It's specifically asking about action, what they have or would do, rather than what they think about it. But it's broad enough that they can provide multiple different types of examples. So I appreciate that. I agree that's like value.
Thank you. If you didn't all hear that, it's broad enough and it's specific enough. But the way you said it was perfect. Yeah, I just want to give a shout out to Jonathan Foreman. I think it was back in 2015 or 16. He and I and a couple other folks from Academic Senate at the time looked over the EEO statement prompt, and we started to create the first iteration. I think this is an evolved prompt since then. And so it's been since then that we've wanted to get to this place where we're actually applying a consistent rubric. So thank you, Jonathan, and for your perspective and support in that for the last several years. Bruce, you had something you wanted to add?
Clearly, this is not the space for me to necessarily, I'm questioning, and maybe this is, just studying the person. What about community? But I don't even understand why it might have been left off, but, I just know that in the spaces that I'm trying to teach up in, there's a lot to be said about work that people are doing in the community in order to bridge these gaps. Also, because the community, I've always, from looking at that, maybe I'm missing a lot of community involvement or engagement in order to help with these same goals.
No, thank you for pointing that out, Bruce. Community engagement. Yeah, if you were to look at the 5 categories or 6 categories there, could there be community engagement that could fit under there, right? What are you doing in the community? Are you providing learning activities? Are you doing some sort of teaching or counseling that doesn't look like what teaching and counseling may look like at necessarily how we define it at our school, right? So these categories do allow for that transferable skill set to be applied, expanded upon, but perhaps conversation is, can we add a category, right? So unfortunately not for this time, but that's a good point. So HR, let's have that conversation.
So we were talking at our table that it seems like, and I don't want to take credit for this because Mike is the one that came up with the word, but it seems like coaching for something like this could really help a lot. But it may not appear on the application as important to the candidate as it is to us. And then we noticed that the criterion is quality of the diversity statement. So like in the application response number 1, it's kind of brief. It actually has some good stuff that the person is either doing or suggesting to do, but they don't go into a lot of elaborate detail. What happens if they would have done that in their cover letter, but we're limited, it sounds like, in the criteria to just talking about and grading the statement, right? Because and this becomes an issue because if they've been coached well about how important the EEO statement is in community colleges, then they know, oh, I got to spend at least as much time on these kinds of things. If they haven't been coached, then they might think that what they've written here is the first choice. 3 answers, I've given 3 examples of how I would do it or did do it. I'm done, and they're going to get a lower grade, right? And so then, ironically, adding the diversity statement means they're going to get potentially downscored because they haven't been coached. And I imagine the point of the diversity statement is to try and help people that have been from backgrounds where they might not be able to be coached. Does that make sense?
Yes and no. I don't think. I think it's a complicated situation, right? Because we don't. For instance, I was having a conversation with Charlie earlier. Somebody could use GPT-4 and write a beautiful statement, submit it, and we think, wow, they met this. They were coached by AI in a sense. But this is only the criteria we're using to evaluate for the interview. Then we got them in front of us, whether it's on Zoom or live, and we're going to be asking them other questions. We're going to triangulate, and we're going to continue to use the application materials to compare. Like, did they in person Did they sound like what they wrote here? Like, did their behaviors match with their skills and knowledge and abilities that they wrote about in their application? So we're always going to be looking at that. I think, Mike, you even brought that up as a point earlier in terms of having all the information and using all of that to make a decision down the road. I don't think this one singular prompt is going to make or break somebody. But it is important. It is as important as the content, yes, because of the fact that in Ed Code and Title V, all employees of the community college must have a sensitivity and understanding of our diverse student population. That's why it's important. Did you have something, Jonathan?
Just kind of in follow-up, because I've had a similar observation over time, and because people outside of our system don't know the weight we give this, and when they're working on the application form, arguably it's like kind of clearly perfunctory at times compared to what they're pouring into the cover letter or what they put into their CV or things like that. So I would, I've had a willingness at times to find their answer in those other quarters and apply it to this, because I think they can be really disadvantaged and we can turn away good candidates, like if we focus only on the statement. So I've kind of thought about that, and I've wondered about feedback that you or Charlie or anyone might have to that kind of quandary.
So let me just add to that. There is no perfect science to this. Right? There is no formula. No matter how much we work on these criteria, there's no perfect formula. It's just that to the extent that you can explain why you're taking the position that you're taking, and you can talk about it, we want the best candidate. We don't want our own systems to be a barrier to us getting the right people. So, as Jonathan said, he can put a rubric rating on this or that or whatever, but if he seems that the rubric rating deserves more credit because he just sees in the application, this is clearly their strength or whatever, and then no one else really does that, but then they'll say, why'd you give him such a high rating, Jonathan? He can say, did you see the other stuff? I mean, we don't want to ignore this candidate. So these are intended to be mostly practical in most situations in everything. It is not going to catch every scenario of every applicant for who they are. And that's why this is a judgment thing and not a formula thing. So if this is a formula thing, y'all wouldn't be here, neither would I. We just run it through a machine and that would be that. So there's judgment in this. Judgment, conversations, discussion, right? This is an imperfect process. But your thinking and your collaboration is what leads to a successful candidacy for an applicant. So just know that. Yes, we want to use, it helps us normalize things, it helps us stay consistent. Those are all the things. And to the extent that you have to depart that for whatever reason, as long as you can explain it and it's not illegal, it's not anything like that, then talk about it and then land on the place where you think you need to land. Mike.
I just want
Angela, sorry.
So I was going to ask earlier, and I'll ask it now. My greatest successes with rubrics have come from exposing the student to the rubric prior to requiring them to complete the assignment. And so if we're placing value, and I do want to say something about what I see between the difference in the diversity statement. Are we telling candidates, like, these are the criteria by which we're reviewing your materials, even like giving them this paper? Is there something weird about that? Because I agree. I most often see some paragraph from some other portion of their application copy cut pasted into the diversity statement box. And so I think if we're doing our best work to ensure that candidates are valuing this component of the application in the same way that they are in other materials, the fairest thing for us to do is make sure they know that. So that we're not playing some game of you applying for teaching jobs before so you know it's valuable, but this other person just copy cut paste. So I just think it's about transparency. If we're going to place value, I also think, and then I'll shut up, there is, if for whatever reason they suffered a little bit in the diversity statement, we have the opportunity to make up a point in the section that would value their letter and their other application materials a little bit 4 because it goes all the way up to the number 4. So I think, and then there's a final overall ranking, right? So it's not a perfect science. I'm not a mathematician. I want to give them a sticker or like a hug if they do a good job. But I can see that these numbers are not perfect. We're just doing the best we can. But we should try our best to communicate. If this statement is so important to candidates of all shapes, sizes, backgrounds, and locations, that like we think this is valuable, and if at all possible, don't contact us from another place, just in case.
Thank you for bringing that up because that is or was a recommendation by the Academic Senate a couple of years ago, and I know that HR is working on that and building a website for candidates because that's important for transparency purposes. And I agree wholeheartedly with the idea of showing the rubric, letting people know, right? Because even when you give somebody a rubric, I've seen this happen, they don't always follow it. So, did you have something? And then Mike.
I was just going to add that, so the candidate side, I think, is a good solution to it. The other one is, for people that haven't been through this, our application is, most of it's a mind-numbing translation of your resume to this other document. And this EEO statement literally shows up at the very end. So there's just some dissonance in going through that. So I'm thinking, if we really value this, then we should probably extract it and make it like its own thing to upload and then have the rubric with it. Somehow we should put a light on this, because right now it's buried, and at the end are a lot of very factual kind of information in the application.
Yes.
That back?
Thank you. Go ahead.
I agree, with both of you. I think what happens is if it is, they're able to view the rubric or see these statements, it actually even complain. Because if you're big involved in community college, your associate faculty, you're more abreast of what the committees are looking for. But for our area, we have people who are coming in from hospital, professional facilities who have never been in education. So they don't really know what we're looking for outside of that specific knowledge. And so they're not really wrapping their head around what it means to be an academic. So, or what diversity is in education as compared to what they're working in hospitals or community setting. So I think that actually would be the playing field, because I have seen biases on committees not at this, and other hiring committees or selection committees, screening committees, where the candidates were judged on their response, but they were way outside. They had no idea what type of response we were looking for, because they had never been in work education before. And so they were scored lower, even though their information might have been short, kind of like this first intermission here. But it wasn't really a fair comparison to someone who may have been a part-time or associate or adjunct for 10 years.
Thank you for bringing that up. And I think that's why it's important as a committee you talk about in discipline specific, like what can we expect in terms of responses to this question, knowing who might be applying, and then having a discussion about what would be a good response or not, and what would fall into these categories, so that you all are on the same page, right? That's why it's important to have that discussion. And then Julie.
I wonder if it might not be a good idea to actually say the words America's 50-way diversity with flexibility why not just say it out loud? Because I know that if I go through and you just have something and then I read that like that would be very like permanent. And you sort of put a lot more pieces.
Well, so that's a good point. What's not listed here is that there's a sentence or two before this prompt that states MiraCosta is, equal employment opportunity employer, blah, 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 and this is what's important to us, right? It's so going to what you're saying.
Literally saying you will give this the same way, because that's extraordinary. And I would say it's not always normal. So that would be outside the expectations. And so why not just say it if that's contrary to it?
So again, we can take that back, right? So like we can't do anything for this round because we've already let that out, but the points of posting the rubric, saying the weighting of it, putting it in a different format, those are all things that we can, that's why we're here to make things better, so absolutely.
Yeah, and I hope that we can get to a place where we won't even have an extra prompt that they have to write to, and that it's always embedded in whatever application, statement, cover letter that they're writing to this job here at Maricosa or anywhere else. Okay, so we're going to now go on to the second. Oh, well, first of all, nobody mentioned anything about the actual rubric criteria or ask clarifying questions. I didn't want to move forward until we had a conversation about that. Where I saw people underlining things. I overheard some conversation, and so I don't want to put you on the spot, but I'm going to Michelle, only because I saw you circling that complete evidence, and was curious to hear a little bit more about what your thought process was in trying to compare the categories and how maybe you might rate somebody.
Yeah, so we were just trying to figure out, obviously what's the difference between each category and the partial and the complete, because, they look almost similar. And then I know we were kind of talking about, the partial has 1 or 2 examples, and then the complete has 2 or 3. What's the difference? But we're just figuring that really the difference is more of the reflection piece in the third. So they can each have 2 examples, but we're looking for that reflection. So, how does that, what were the changes that they made, and what were they reflecting on? And then looking back at the prompt, please reflect on your examples. So that's kind of what we were noticing is you can give your examples kind of like in the number 1, you can give all the examples you want, but really you can like, how did that make that change affect the student? How did it affect you? How did it affect your teaching or your discipline? So that's kind of what we came up with as far as the differences.
Thank you for that. That was perfect, because what you're looking for are the knowledge, skills, and abilities. Again, the knowledge, skills, and abilities related to the job, which is sensitivity and understanding of our diverse student population. How will they work with our students? How will they teach? How will they counsel? How will they be a librarian, et cetera? Go ahead, Osvaldo.
I have a little difficulty with the partial evidence because the or part, you just show many uses, so they don't have to provide examples. The subjective part too is that we're assuming that the committee is also informed the committee. That we understand the same language that we understand what we don't mean. And the reality is the committee, they're all in different levels of equity and equity work. Some people might not agree with equity work, but yet there's a committee. Right? So the assumption is that we're putting policies that we all understand what we do, but on that partial evidence, candidate shows readiness for students contribute to fulfilling this partial goal. I don't know what that means. Maybe that just means, yes, I want to contribute. Is that enough?
Is that a knowledge, skill, or ability? If they wrote that sentence that you just said, is that a knowledge, skill, or ability?
Yeah.
Which one of them?
Ability.
The ability to what have they demonstrated as their ability?
To be open to ideas.
Okay. Are we a learning institution? Are we, when we hire somebody, do we not have a 10-year process where we allow them to grow and we provide feedback and then we make a decision about whether they continue with us or not? I think these are some of the things. I mean, it's not an easy question to answer, but it's something that you have to think, okay, is this person have the potential? Because they have the knowledge, ability, skills, or abilities. They have that readiness. That's why it's partial evidence. When you have a diverse group of candidates and you've vetted all of them, is that person who got partial evidence going to rise to the top? Maybe not. Did they rise to the top in other categories? Okay, but this is where, as a committee, if you have that pre-conversation, speaking to the point of like, is everybody on the same page as what equity work is or how important it is, it's important to lay out, everybody shares the quote-unquote good, or like what could be an answer for partial evidence, what would be an answer for complete evidence. By having that conversation, you start norming that, so that by the time you have a deliberation later on, after everybody's reviewed the applicants, now you're speaking more or less on the same page. And you can then ask why, to get to people's rationale. and point to the evidence of the knowledge, skills, and abilities that help them get to the place where they're at. And it's in a slide later on, but a rubric and a point system is not like the final say. It's the conversation that happens after that that's the most important. The rubric really helps kind of norm and set the conversation on the same plane, speaking field, but the conversation you have as a group afterwards is going to be important, but that won't matter anything if you didn't have the prior conversation. So it's a whole process, right? Go ahead.
And also, when you have these conversations, someone's going to say something someone may say something that for you it came out of left field, and you don't know where that belongs. Like, was that partial evidence? Is that complete evidence? People might differ on their opinions about that, but to Luke's point, it's a conversation. This is a tool. This is a tool to engage in the conversation. And your discussions going forward, you're not going to be able to capture everything on that front end either. But if you put in the work and you have a really good conversation, at least you all are on some sort of same page on a vast majority of things anyway. Then when you get the different kind of experience that you really didn't talk about, then you take the time to talk about it. But this is not the thing that gets the people the job. It's just one of the tools that help you screen. It's just another tool that helps you screen.
Thank you. All right, so let's get to the part of just get maybe 2 minutes. Some of you have probably already read these. Look at the two applicant responses and then take a stab at a first rating that you would put. And then I'll give you 3 minutes, and then we'll have a group discussion. All right, let's bring it back to the large group. Hearing a lot of great conversation at the tables about these two applicant statements. And you can imagine, I picked two extremes, but these are real examples. Let's just get some first impressions. Maybe just what are some things that came up at your group? What you discussed when reviewing these two examples against the rubric? What questions came up, or what concerns, or maybe what was your rationale for choosing one rating over another? Who wants to go? Go ahead, Jonathan.
So, I thought it showed some basics of understanding and practical things just without the depth. So for me, it was partial.
That's correct. That's exactly right.
Like, it didn't reflect, no or minimal evidence. There was enough, like, there was concrete examples that was very detailed or specific. So I would give them probably partial. And like, kind of going off my earlier thing, if I saw a lot more depth in their cover letter, that answered it more than I would credit.
Thank you. So for applicant number one, Jonathan was saying he would say a partial. Is there somebody who would say a different rating for number one, and why? Yeah, it's totally okay. This is where we have a discussion, right? Go ahead.
I'll talk about what we heard about. I'll give a different version of it, but I'm very wordy. I'm a wordy person. And I kind of joke that this was like rough draft and final draft of like what we typically see from our students. So on just looking at how many examples are there and do they demonstrate this understanding of diversity, number one meets the criteria. There's 3 different examples. Did they go on and on about what they did or didn't do? Not necessarily. Clearly not as much as the second one. But we were trying to say, like, sometimes less can be more. I mean, there is an awareness gap. I still graded it partial evidence because they use the word diverse, and then the only example of diverse populations that they give us to be in gender. But I could see that they still did give 3 examples, and they showed a readiness or an awareness of. So I don't know, you look at this and instinctually, like, numbers of words on page, I'm like, oh, clearly 1 and 3. But that's not always the case. I think if careful reading is really critical, and
Thank you for sharing that. A careful reading is important. Juan Carlos.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, just looking at the question, and actually, I would have a recommendation to include more of a directive. And with the question, because right now, just please reflect, I would actually please reflect and provide something like that, like a direction to the right thing in. But I think for me, what we set out was the word how, right? Like the question isn't really asking this, read your eyes as a viewer, what would you do with it? Asking how would you design or how would you I think that falls.
I gotta know what you're
Of how they would meet the different needs of those students.
Thank you for pointing and clarifying that the how is really at the center of this, and so evidence would be important to address the how. Go ahead. Donnie. Oh, you didn't have your hand up? Oh, sorry. Somebody else? Okay. Go ahead, Marcus.
I think it's also, and I say it might be because I'm also bred by the community college system as an adjunct, so my response would be different. But I feel like context is also critical. So when we're talking about representation, what's that historical oppression of students not represented in art would be like a free response, right? Versus this one, pretty minimal. Like we just use the word diverse and like, oh, we're showing diverse figures. And like for a tenure track faculty position, is that something that is of significant?
Thank you. Juan Carlos?
Yeah, so something else that I know I would probably bring up in conversation with the committee is like, especially if somebody has had like an associate faculty position in that respective discipline, and they're saying I would find that a little concerning because then they have no examples yet they've been doing the job for whatever amount of time that they've
Okay. So again, this is important that you're talking about, again, what would be acceptable in these areas. And again, it could be discipline specific, but I would probably caution not to take into consideration whether they're an associate and they've worked with us over somebody who's worked somewhere else. Again, that might be our assumption, right? So we got to go based on what they've written. And if they haven't written very much, then that's your evidence, right? But maybe not that they've been an associate with us or they've been in higher education teaching for X amount of years, that they should be able to say something. So, but that would be good to have a conversation about what would be acceptable. And as you're reviewing, rely on the evidence, the knowledge, skills, and abilities, and be able to back up your opinion with that. Who else had their hand up? Go ahead, Mark, and then Bruce.
Just I feel like the prompt allows for concrete examples, and then it also gives you a loophole to get out of all the examples. Because I would change the world. You know what I mean? Like I will, bring peace on earth. So I could easily have no experience in equity, nothing. I actually probably disagree on this, which is a whole different thing. But I would do X, Y, and Z, and then still get 3 points. So again, this is just a tool. It's just how it works. For me, I personally gave them 3 on number 1 because yeah, they would, and to me that counts. But it's still not accurate. In my eyes, it's still not saying it's just I will. Like I will lose 10 pounds. I just don't know if it's going to be 5 years from now or 20 years from now or 100 years from now, right? So it's just taking a grain of salt because it doesn't really mean much.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to have a conversation. Go ahead, Charlie.
So the notion of would and did obviously favors those that have experience and can speak to their experience around it. But you have some people that don't. They meet minimum qualifications. And if they meet other parts of the application that get them make them competitive for the discussion of having an interview, and you have to rely on would because they just don't have the years of experience, then you're looking at other things other skills that may be appropriate, like we're willing to take a chance on the would, because you don't know. The past is a better indicator of how what she said, past is a better indicator of how they would handle it because they have that demonstrated experience. And it wasn't the outcome that matters, that they've gone through the process, they can speak to that, right? But you may have some people that just don't have the same kind of experience but they've given it thought. They've worked in something that connects them to, you know, if you're a president, what would you do? Well, I can't speak to that. I've never been a president. But I can tell you what I would do if I were, right? And until I get that job, I won't ever have that experience as a president. But I can speak to, I've done some budgeting, I've done some HR work, right? I can speak to that stuff. So I wouldn't get too caught up on wood. I would just look at the application again. That's one aspect of consideration. Keep that in mind. And is it more reliable on experience versus wood? Sure, I can see that. But you also have some people that may be great candidates, and they would. But then maybe in the interview, you can drill down further with some of the questions that you have around whatever you have.
That's why I gave them 3, because there's this growth that can happen. It's just a factor of all the points that we're taking, and so it's another factor, just like the application, just like the everything. So it's just another point for us to help us make that decision and that conversation.
Thank you.
Is where we're entering these numbers, will it allow us to get fractional numbers, or does it have to be 1, 2, 3?
It's going to be those categories, and they will amount to numbers. So no, you won't be able to put in fractions.
For me, because for me, I mean, of course, we're like an educational institution and stuff, so we're going to make things more complicated. Right? I mean, it's just we're looking at this. Because I'm not feeling there's the part of me. So for me, I want someone to also demonstrate that they care enough about our institution to look into it and to reflect on who we are when they're answering. Therefore, that first sentence, I would bring in visiting parties that reflect the diverse student body of the college. I mean, that means you know nothing about us. You literally know nothing about us. That's a cookie cutter response, and I'm not feeling that. Like I get that you're demonstrating something to me, but you're not that into me.
Right.
You don't know that exists about me.
No, in fact,
And with respect, it's like, look, anybody can do that. It's not even detailed. I can go down. I can go to one on that.
no, and you should expect more, because in our application, job application announcement, it does talk about demographics. It does talk about our students. So the applicant should be speaking to that. And so again, having that conversation in your department, because again, the information, the student demographics that are prevalent in your particular program might be slightly different or whatever, but if you're looking for people who have, again, having that conversation, you're on the same page, but like keeping the door, being flexible and keeping the doors open, you might have some expectations, but then you might get answers that also were not part of that discussion that you'd want to continue having a discussion about. And somebody could say, well, they didn't talk about HSI, us being an HSI and how they're going to work with Latinx students. And that's what we talked about before. And so, but they did talk about this other student population. Okay, that doesn't mean we're knocking them down. That means we're going to have a conversation to get a group understanding of where this person might be. And again, this is screening them to an interview so that then we can vet them through additional assessments like questions and prompts or writing prompts or demonstrations that we can assess their knowledge, skills, and abilities in their ability to work with our student populations, right?
I'll add to that. You may value that, Bruce, but someone on the committee may not evaluate it in the same way. Some people will say, for example, I want to work for a particular employer, but I'll apply to other employers because I just need a job, right? And it may not be into you, but I mean, you can imagine, you of course love sports, and so you can say that person doesn't want to be on a team, and I'm just not into that team. But that doesn't mean that team doesn't want them, and they're not going to pay them because they can do their job, right? They can do their job at whatever it is, and they're going to help them win, right? So we're looking for winners. Is it nice that they're into us? Sure. Is it a minimum qualification? Is it an absolute requirement that they're into us? If they give their all and they have the skills, they can deliver for us, whether they're kind of into us at the romantic stage of trying to apply for a job or not. Is it really that big of a criteria? For some, yes. And for some, maybe not so much. But have your position and just talk about it and say, well, this is important to me. And that's fine. It's important to you, and someone it may not be. But at the end of the day, their KSAs should get them the job. Their knowledge, skills, and abilities about how they can deliver and whatever they're trying to do, that should get them their job at the end of the day. Yes, they can be into it, and that's a plus. We do, that is an attractive thing. But, right, it's an attractive thing, but it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be anyway, a deal-breaking thing.
Thank you. All right, so this is an amazing discussion and one that I'm very thankful that we're having. Let's continue with the second applicant. Any thoughts on this, your particular rating and why? Who wants to get us started with that? Somebody who maybe hasn't spoken up yet. Go ahead, Lisa. Leslie, sorry.
Yeah, I think this one was really good for that reflective aspect. So not only are they committed to the work, but they're committed to the self-reflection of even growing as someone who's already committed to the work. The committee also likes that we, or my committee future president, we like that we were able to see some of the things that they might be able to bring to our community and some of the positive changes we might be able to see by adding this person to the broader team of Miracos. So this one was a 0. No, it's
All right, so complete. All right. Anybody else have a different rating for this second applicant and why? So are we in agreement that this might be, okay, a little bit more complete evidence? All right, so, and we know, we've been on these committees before, many of us. We've seen the range of answers. And hopefully, since we changed the prompt, we're not gonna see the kinds of response we used to get, which was like, I love traveling and, my husband or my wife is, and, that's why. Go ahead, Bruce.
I want to challenge something that Charlie just said. It's not challenge like whatever, right? I'm just saying, with this question specifically, because you said maybe this should not be a deal breaker. I do remember my AS president talking to us about what's the second qualification, what's the 2 qualifications you need to be a MiraCosta College professor, and this question is number 2. I'm just putting this out there because for me, this is me, this is what they brought on board, right? For me, it is a deal breaker if you don't answer this, but this is half, I'm just reflecting that maybe the world has changed since then. I don't think so because of all the lettering that we're getting off of this, but if this is not answered well, what gives them the right from what we're doing here, what we're trying to do here, what gives them the right to even get an interview with us?
Okay, sure. So I guess what I say is that I don't want to minimize the question or the importance of what I said in terms of them being into us, right? I can demonstrate and have a great answer to something, and it may or may not look like they're into us. When you say, I'm into you, right? Like, I want to be into you, and because I know something that's very specific around our culture in a way that maybe other people can penetrate, whatever. It needs to be a good answer. It's not about lowering standards or anything like that. I'm not speaking to that. I was speaking to that you can have a less than adequate answer, none to minimal, right? To the third category, which is, what's the third one? Sorry?
Complete evidence.
Complete, right? Complete evidence, right? Partial evidence, complete evidence, right? That all, I'm not distracted from any of that. But what I don't want to sort of say or give the impression of is that when you're looking at these things and people start saying, for example, they didn't read our website, they didn't read this and that, right? Okay, so the person says, I'm applying in Palomar. This ain't Palomar. right? That is clearly a disconnect around your ability to fill out an application. And in those kind of things, absolutely, right? They're not paying attention to details. They're putting other colleges, to whom it may concern, and whatever, right? And so those kind of details about they're really not into, and it clearly shows, in that kind of way, then obviously you have every right to screen them out for that. But I don't want people to feel like you can have inadequate or adequate answers, but you can have sort of an adequate answer that doesn't feel like they're into you, but they can still have an adequate answer, and it doesn't seem like they've done all the other homework that other people have or whatever. So I just want to be sure that that's okay. All right.
All right, thank you. All right, so that was a great activity. I encourage you to continue these conversations, not only about this criteria, but all the others as well. When you meet together with your committee, whether it's after this talk or the next time you meet, okay? Where are you going to find this online? So you're going to, let's say you have Janet Jackson has applied to your job posting, right? You just hire her on the spot, right? On the system, when you log in, you click on you find your job pool, and you find the applicant. For each applicant, there's going to be on the right-hand side this star that says evaluate applicant. When you open that up, you're going to get a screen with all of these 5 criteria. And so this is where you'll enter all those ratings for each of those criteria, okay? And you can also include some comments. Now, be careful, right? What you write in here, stick to the KSAs, right? Knowledge, skills, and abilities. Stick to that when you're writing comments on here. Charlie, you want to say something?
Please. Please stick to the KSAs and do not speak to anything else. You won't have to worry about that illegal list or anything else if you speak to them KSAs. Speak to the KSAs.
Thank
I
you.
can't emphasize that enough.
No, that's all I'm going to say. That's how important it is. Go ahead.
So if we're taking like paper notes while we're reading the applications and doing the ratings, are we allowed to take paper notes? And if we are, can we bring them to the meeting when we discuss the ratings, find out who we're going to interview?
And so any notes that you write, that you deliberate with, we need to know, that becomes discoverable from a legal perspective. So if you're at home and you're just kind of taking some notes, and then you fill out your thing, and then you throw them away, and then, right, that's one thing. You take these notes because the system doesn't have what you feel like you need to be able to have a deliberation on, and then you bring those notes into the meeting, and you deliberate from them. That creates some potential exposure for us, depending on, obviously, what you write.
And then we'll have access to those comments later if that person makes it to the interview? Yes.
Yes, right, yes.
Yeah, great question. All right, so some best practices, just to reiterate what we just already discussed, is that discuss this evaluative criteria as a group first, before you even engage with looking at the applications. Because we shouldn't be discovering what's important to you specifically when it comes at the end of the process where we're deliberating. That should be made known up front, right? And so we can also mitigate any biases that there may be as we're going into this process, okay? The other thing is understand the rubrics in the rating system. So if you have any questions about the rubrics or the rating system, HR is your resource, right? Apply this rating in the rubric consistently. So go back to the first couple that you've looked at, just so that you can make sure that you applied the same process throughout. Because as you start doing it, you start seeing different examples, and you're like, oh, well, maybe it should be this or that, and you start getting more nuance in the way you start evaluating. So go back to the beginning and look at those first couple again to make sure. These scores will be averaged and disaggregated. When you come together, everybody individually rates their applicants, right? And so you come together as a group. The chair of the committee will have all of the ratings, and that will be a starting place for conversation. You'll be able to see, kind of remind yourself, because I know it happens like several weeks and you haven't remembered, like having even looked at it. You're probably sleep grading. You're going to have access to your scores and your notes. And just, again, it's a starting place for conversation. Then you get together as a group and you start providing your evidence. So why did why did you score high? Why did you score low? And then you start going from there, and perhaps people move up or down based on that deliberation. Okay? So the rubric and the score is not like the final say. It is a starting point. So, with that, what do I have here? Where did I get this quote? I'm sorry. Oh, this is me. I said this. I was like, why didn't I attribute this quote? I was like, okay. All right, so I'm going to say it. Diversity of thought, right? Diversity of thought among committee members is imperative, right? That's why we have a committee. You all bring something different to the table. And being on the same page and having clarity of the evaluative criteria is critical. So it's not about groupthink, it's about like group understanding and awareness as you go forward together. So with that in mind, I wish you luck, and I'm very lucky not to be on a hiring committee this semester.
Thank you, everyone.